I've watched a woman put up 400 quarts in a single summer and never lose one to spoilage. 400. And a man down the road called it women's fussing. Right up until the winter, his own put-up went bad and his family took sick off it. It was never fussing. There's a science under every step of it, and she had it in her hands 60 years before anybody printed it in a book. Here's the twist. Number 12 is a jar that can kill a whole family and sit on the shelf looking perfect the entire time. Number 15 holds a heat no boiling pot on earth can reach. And number 1 is a judgment a woman carried her whole life and never once wrote down. And when she went, it went with her. Let's count down the 25 canning secrets mountain women took to the grave. Number 25, knowing which canner and why it was never a choice. There's 2 pots, and they look like cousins. One's a tall kettle of boiling water, the other's a heavy thing with a lid that locks down and a little weight that rattles on top. Ma kept both, and she never once mixed 'em up. The boiling water was for anything sour, your tomatoes, your fruit, your pickles, your jams. The heavy pot, the pressure canner, was for everything that wasn't. Your green beans, your corn, your greens, your meat. They tell me sourness holds a line. Below it, boiling water's plenty. Above it, boiling water won't touch what can grow in a sealed jar. Put your beans through the boiling water because it's quicker, and you've filled a jar that can lay a family out. She never had to think about it. A lot of folks now don't even know there's 2. Number 24, heating the jars so they don't fly apart. Glass doesn't like a shock. Ma brought her clean jars up warm in a pan of water alongside the canner, and she filled 'em hot and stood 'em back in hot. Never a cold jar into a boiling pot. Glass swells with heat, and if one part swells while another stays cold, it splits, same as a cold glass cracking under hot coffee. I've heard a jar let go in a full canner, a dull thump like a roof working overhead, and then you've got glass and beans loose in your water and the whole batch ruined. And check every rim with your thumb before you fill it. A chip the size of a grain of sand on the lip will never seal, and you won't find that out till the lid's up in the dead of winter. Number 23, Headspace, the finger of air she left on purpose. She never filled a jar to the top, and there was a rule to how much she left. 1/4 inch under the lid for jams and jellies, 1/2 inch for fruit and tomatoes and pickles, a full inch for the beans and the meat in the pressure canner. That gap is not wasted room. As the jar heats, the food swells and the air drives up and out, and that's what pulls the lid down tight as it cools. Too little room, and the food boils up under the lid and breaks the seal before it sets. Too much, and there's air left trapped that'll darken your food and spoil it from the top down. A finger's width. She measured it with her eye, and she was never wrong. Number 22, hot pack and raw pack. 2 ways to fill a jar. There's 2 ways to get the food in. Raw pack, you put it in cold and raw and pour the hot liquid over. Hot pack, you heat it through first, then pack it hot. Ma hot packed most everything. Cold raw food is full of air, and air floats. You'll pull a jar out in January, and half your beans are up at the top with 2 inches of cloudy water under 'em. Heating it first drives that air out and shrinks it down, so it stays put and keeps better. Raw pack's faster and prettier going in, but it floats and it shrinks on you. Hot pack's more work, and it holds. She'd tell you the extra 10 minutes at the stove bought you a jar that set right all winter. Number 21, working the air out and wiping the rim clean. Once the jar's packed, there's still air hiding down in it, caught between the beans up against the glass. Ma ran a broom straw down the inside, right around, worked those bubbles up and out, then topped the liquid back off. Trapped air is trapped spoilage. Then the part everybody's in too big a hurry for. She took a clean, damp rag and wiped every rim before the lid went on. 1 seed, 1 thread of tomato skin, One smear of grease on that rim and the lid can't make it seal. It'll look sealed and it isn't. I've watched a whole afternoon's work spoil off a rim somebody didn't wipe. Number 20. The flat lid you only get to use once. This one catches people to this day. The canning lid comes in two pieces, a flat disc and a screw band. The band you keep and reuse till it rusts through. The flat lid, the one that actually seals, you use one time and then it's done. There's a ring of soft compound around its underside, and when it heats, it molds itself to your jar rim and sets there. Pop it open and that compound's already took its shape. It will not seal true a second time. Ma saved everything. String, buttons, bacon grease, but never a used flat lid for real canning. She'd put it on a jar of dry beans in the cupboard, something that didn't need to seal, and no further. Reuse one on your winter food and you're gambling the whole jar on a lid that's already spent. That's the jars and the lids handled. From here down it's the food itself and where the real danger lives. If you find this worth knowing, subscribe. I put one of these up every few days. Number 19. Reading a seal. 3 ways she checked. The lid sealing at night is a sound I grew up on. A little ping, one at a time, an hour after the canner came off, each jar pulling its lid down as it cooled, but she never trusted the sound alone. Next morning, she checked every jar 3 ways. She looked. A sealed lid is sucked down in the middle, not domed up. She pressed the center. If it gives and pops back, it didn't take. And she lifted the jar by nothing but the edge of that flat lid, an inch off the table. If the lid holds the whole jar's weight, it's sealed. Any jar that failed any one of the 3 did not go to the cellar. It went to the ice box that week or got done over. A doubtful seal on the shelf is a jar of poison waiting on the wrong month. Number 18. Pickling salt and why the box off the shelf won't do. For her pickle brine, she kept a particular salt, pickling salt, plain, nothing added. The salt in the round box has got 2 things in it she didn't want. Iodine, which can darken a pickle and turn a brine murky, and a powder to keep it from caking, and that powder won't dissolve. It leaves your brine cloudy as branch water after a rain, so you can't tell a good jar from a spoiling one by looking. Pickling salt is just salt, fine enough to melt clean into the brine. Now use the wrong salt and nothing's going to poison you, but you've made a muddy looking jar you can't read, and reading the jar is half of keeping people safe. Number 17. The vinegar had to be strong enough to do the keeping. Here's the one that matters most in a pickle jar, and it's the one people fool with. In a pickle, it isn't the salt that keeps it, and it isn't the boiling. It's the vinegar. The sour is what holds off the thing that can kill you. So the vinegar has to be strong enough, and you cannot cut it. Store vinegar is made to a set strength. 5% sour, it'll say right on the jug, and a tested recipe is built on exactly that. Water it down for a softer pickle, or use homemade vinegar nobody knows the strength of, and you've dropped the sour below the line and made a low-acid jar that only looks like a pickle. Ma would add sugar to sweeten a pickle. She would never cut the vinegar. That was the one thing that wasn't hers to change. Number 16. Slipping the skins with a scald and a cold dip. Tomatoes and peaches go in the jar without their skins, and there's a trick that beats standing there with a paring knife. Ma kept 2 pots going, one boiling, one full of cold spring water. She'd drop the tomatoes in the boiling water, 30 seconds, a minute at the outside, just till the skins split, then lift them straight into the cold. The heat swells the skin loose off the flesh, and the cold snaps it back so it slips off in your hand whole in a second. Leave them in the boiling water too long though, and you're not skinning them. You're cooking them to mush before they reach the jar. 30 seconds and cold. A bushel of tomatoes went from a misery to an afternoon, and your hands weren't tore up with a knife. Number 15, the pressure canner and the weight that jiggled. This is the heavy pot, and it did what boiling never could. I'll tell you plainly what's under it and then leave it be. Boiling water tops out at 212 degrees, and there's a thing that grows in a sealed low-acid jar that laughs at 212. The pressure canner locks the steam in, and locked up steam runs hotter, up to 240 degrees, and 240 kills it. That's the whole reason the pot exists. The little weight on top rattled to tell you the pressure was holding. 10 pounds of it, more if you lived up high where the air's thin. And you did not walk off from it. Let it run dry, or let the pressure fall off and climb back, and your jars aren't safe, and you won't know which ones. Ma can by that rattle, the way I set my work by the sound of a good roof underground. You learn the sound that means it's right, and the second it changes, you move. Number 14, tomatoes lost their sour, and she'd have never known. Here's an honest one, and it's a thing that changed after her time. For years, a tomato was sour enough on its own to can in a boiling water bath, safe as a pickle. But the tomatoes got bred over the years. Sweeter, milder, less bite, and a good deal of what's grown now doesn't carry the sour it used to. Enough that it can slip over the line into low acid without ever tasting like it did. So the word now is to put a little sour back. A spoonful of bottled lemon juice in every pint, 2 in a quart, or a pinch of citric acid right in the jar before it's processed. It doesn't change the taste to speak of. Ma never had to, because her tomatoes had their own sour. It's no knock on her. The tomato changed under us, and the rule had to change with it. Number 13, putting up meat, and the one mistake that spoils it. Come hog killing, or a mess of chickens too old to lay, the pressure canner earned its keep. Meat and broth are as low acid as it gets, so it's the heavy pot or nothing. Ma packed the meat raw or lightly browned, left a full inch at the top, and let it run the long time it takes, 90 minutes and better under pressure. Here's the mistake that gets folks: too much fat. Fat on the rim, fat worked up under the lid, and the lid seals on grease instead of glass. It'll look sealed and let go later, or never take at all. So you keep the fat down and wipe that rim twice if you have to. A jar of your own chicken off the shelf in February when the snow's to the window, Pa would say that was money in the bank you could eat. That's the sides and the meat. Now the middle of the list, and it's where the whole thing turns dangerous. Number 12, the shortcuts that kill people, and the perfect looking jar. This is the one I teased, and I'll give it its full due, because it has killed people who did everything else right. There is a thing that grows only in a sealed jar with no air, not enough sour, and not enough heat. It can't grow out in the open, only shut up tight, the way canning makes it. It doesn't cloud the jar. It doesn't always smell. The jar can look perfect, and what it makes is one of the deadliest poisons there is, where a taste can be enough. Here's where the old ways went wrong, because they didn't know what we know. There was open kettle canning. Cook the food, ladle it hot into jars, screw the lid on, and let it seal off its own heat. No canner at all. Common as dirt once. It seals the jar fine, but it never heats the sealed jar hot enough to kill what's in it. There was oven canning. Jars set in a dry oven. Dry heat doesn't carry into a jar the way boiling water and steam do. The food never gets hot enough clear through. And worse, a jar can burst in a hot oven and cut you open. There was the wax seal, a skim of melted paraffin poured over a jar of jam, and mold grows down under that wax where you never see it. And there was turning a hot jar upside down and calling that a seal. Every one of those was done by good women who fed their families for years and mostly got away with it. Mostly. The sour and the pressure and the timing are the only things that make a jar safe, and there is no way around them. Can your low-acid food in a pressure canner on a tested time, and when you open a jar of it, the old rule still holds. Boil it hard 10 minutes before it ever touches your mouth. That 10 minutes has saved more lives than anybody will ever count. Number 11, sweet pickles and the lime that had to be rinsed. For a pickle that stayed crisp and didn't slump limp in the jar, the old women soaked the cucumber slices in lime water first. Pickling lime, a white powder stirred into a crock of water, the slices left in it overnight. It firms the flesh, so the pickle snaps weeks later instead of going soft. But here's the part that has to go with it, and the old recipes didn't always say it. That lime has got to come all the way back out. You drain it, soak the slices in fresh water, and drain and soak again, 3 times over, an hour each. Lime left in the pickle cuts the sour, and you know now what the sour's doing. It's the one thing holding off the poison. Leave the lime in, and you've quietly turned a safe pickle into a dangerous one. Rinse it 3 good times, and it's a fine old trick. Skip the rinsing, and it's a hazard nobody can see. Number 10, fruit in a syrup, and why not just water? Peaches, pears, plums, cherries. The fruit went up in light sugar syrup, and the sugar's not just for sweet. Ma stirred up a syrup. A light one might be 2 cups of sugar to 6 of water. Heavier for a tartar fruit, and poured it hot over the fruit in a jar. The syrup holds the color, keeps the shape, and carries the heat all through the jar better than plain water does. Pack fruit in water alone, and it comes out pale and floating and soft. The flavor washed right out of it. It's still safe, mind. Fruit's sour enough either way. This is about how good it is, not whether it keeps. A jar of her spiced peaches opened at Christmas tasted like the orchard in August. That was the whole point of it, to open up July in the dead of winter. Number 9, knowing a jar had gone bad before you ever tasted it. She could condemn a jar from across the room. A lid domed up instead of sucked down, gone. A jar that spit or spurted when she cracked it, gone. Cloudy where it ought to be clear. Streams of bubbles rising in a jar sitting dead still. A smell that hit wrong. Any silk or mold. A food gone soft that shouldn't be. Every one of those went out to the hogs or into the ground, and never a taste to check it. That's the rule that keeps you above ground. You do not taste a doubtful jar. The worst of what grows in a bad jar can be sitting in there with no cloud and no smell at all. Which is why, when a low-acid jar went on the table, the old women boiled its contents hard for 10 minutes first every time. A taste to just see has killed people who knew better. Number 8, dating the jars and eating the oldest first. A cellar full of jars is only wealth if you can tell what's what and how old it is. Ma marked hers, a grease pencil on the lid, the food and the year, and she set 'em so the oldest stood to the front. You eat down through your store in the order you put it up, oldest first, so nothing sets 3 years while you eat this year's. Home canned food is best inside a year. It stays safe longer than that if the seal holds, but the color fades and the goodness with it. Lose track and shove the new jars in front, and you'll find one from 4 winters back gone dull and flat behind the rest. She ran that cellar like a store ledger, first in, first out, and not a jar was let go to waste. Number 7, minding the jars themselves, the reuse that had to be watched. A good jar canned for 50 years. Ma's jars had come down from her own mother, and some of mine came down from her. But you watched 'em. Every jar got run under her fingers before it was filled. A hairline crack, a star in the bottom, a nick out of the rim, and it was set aside, because a flawed jar breaks in the canner or fails its seal on the shelf. The screw bands got watched too. Once a band rusted thin or bent out of round, it couldn't hold even pressure, and it was done. The glass she trusted for a lifetime. The soft parts, the flat lids, the tired bands, those she replaced without a second thought. Knowing which part of a thing you can trust forever and which part you throw away is most of taking care of anything. Number 6, the all-day put-up and the heat of it. Canning was never a thing you did for an hour. When the garden came in, it came in all at once, and putting it up was a day that started before light and ran past dark. A woman and her daughters and whatever granddaughters could be put to work, a bushel at a time. The kitchen 100 degrees, with the canner going and the cook stove going, and no such thing as air conditioning. Everybody had a station, one washing, one packing, one at the canner, the least one snapping beans. You worked in that heat because the garden doesn't wait. A bushel of beans left 2 days is a bushel spoiling. My own job as a boy was the wood and the water, hauling for a fire that could not be let down. By dark, there'd be 6, 7 dozen quarts stood up, gleaming on the table, still ticking as they cooled. And that was a winter's food, bought in 1 day of sweat. Number 5, canning by a recipe that had actually been proven. Here's a hard thing to say about the old ways, and it's true. A woman could can the same way her whole life and never have a lick of trouble, and still be doing a thing that was a gamble every time. She just never rolled a bad number. The safe times aren't guesses. Somebody tested how long it takes the heat to reach the middle of a packed jar and kill what's in it, and that testing is what a good recipe stands on. When the old recipe and the tested one disagree, it isn't that Grandma was a fool. It's that she never had to proven, and you do. So you honor her by using it. Change a canning recipe on your own. Cut the time, use a bigger jar, swap in something that shifts the sour, and you've thrown out the one thing that made it safe. That right there is the whole of why this channel sources what it tells you. Old knowledge is worth competing. It is worth checking too. The last 4 aren't steps anymore. They're what all the steps were for. Number 4, the jar as money and bring my jar back. A jar of food was the mountain's own currency, and everybody honored it. You took a mess of something to a sick neighbor, a new mother, a grieving house, and it went in one of your jars, and the plain understanding, never even spoke out loud, was that the jar came back to you clean. Empty jars were counted and returned like borrowed money, because that's what they were. A family only had so many, and one jar was a whole winter's worth of use. Ma could tell you whose jar was whose by the shape of it and the age of the glass. A woman short of jars in the fall was in real trouble, and a woman with plenty could carry a neighbor clean through. It was a kindness and a ledger at the same time, and nobody had to write a word of it down. Number 3, the arithmetic of a winter. How many jars it took. Here's what a mountain woman carried in her head that near nobody carries now. She could stand at the edge of a garden in July, green and half grown, and know almost to the jar what it would take to bring her family to spring. Arithmetic done without a pencil. So many mouths, so many months from the last of the garden to the first of the next. Call it October to May. 30-odd weeks of eating out of glass. A family of 8 might need 700-800 quarts stood up in that cellar to do it. Beans and corn and tomatoes and greens, fruit and pickles, meat where they had it. She knew a row of green beans this long yielded about so many quarts, that if the beans failed, she'd have to make it up in something else, or somebody went short come February. And she planned the whole garden backward off that cellar. Planted not for what looked good in July, but for what the shells would need in March. Get it wrong and it was no small thing. Come up 100 quarts short and there's a hungry stretch at the tail of winter, that lean time before the first greens, when the cellar's near empty and the garden's not yet in. Come up over and you fed a neighbor who'd come up short, and banked the goodwill against the year you came up short yourself. That whole reckoning, the yields, the mouths, the weeks, the margin she left for a bad year, she ran it every summer of her life, and never once called it mathematics. She called it putting up enough. Number 2, a winter read off the cellar wall. Come the first hard frost, a mountain woman would go down the cellar steps with a lamp and stand there a minute just looking, and she could read that wall of jars like a page in a book. She knew, by the rose catching the light, whether the family was going to be all right, whether the beans would reach March or run out in February, whether there was fruit enough to keep the children happy or only enough for a Sunday. It was the whole winter written out in glass, and she was the only soul who could read it. Going down into that cellar was like going down into the mine, cool and dark and dead quiet. Everything you needed to live stored up in the dark around you. The difference is, the mine gave up its coal to strangers far off. That cellar held food she'd grown and canned with her own 2 hands for the exact people she loved. A man never had a bank vault that meant the half of what that wall of jars meant to the woman who filled it. Number 1, knowing they'd sealed the judgment she took to the grave. And here's the last one, the one all the rest were only pieces of. Everything I've told you, the 2 canners, the sour line, the Headspace, the seal, the boiling before you dared to taste, all of it came down in the end to one woman's judgment. Because there was no gauge she trusted more than herself. She'd feel a lid and know. She'd look at a brine and know it had gone wrong before there was a thing you or I could point to. She'd hear the pings across the kitchen that first night and count them without looking up, and know which jar out of 30 hadn't sung and would have to be checked in the morning. She held in her hands and her ears and her nose the whole difference between food that would feed her family and food that could kill it. And she held it so lightly it looked like nothing at all. It looked like fussing to the man down the road. It was the furthest thing on earth from fussing. It was a lifetime of attention, built one summer at a time, standing at a hot stove next to her own mother who had stood next to hers. And it carried a weight most people never stop to think about, that if she got it wrong, it wasn't her that paid. It was her children at the table. That's the part that's gone, not the jars. You can buy jars, you can buy a canner, you can read every number I've said tonight right off a page. What's gone is the judgment that read a jar the way you read a face. The certainty a woman built over 50 summers and never once wrote down, because she learned it standing beside her mother and assumed her daughters would learn it standing beside her. And for a long while they did. The last woman on our creek who could look at a full cellar and know it was safe without a gauge or a chart has been in the ground a good many years now. Her jars are gone to the dump or the antique table, and the knowing, the real thing, the judgment, she took that with her. Here's my challenge, and it's a small one. Pick one, just one. Grow a single row of green beans this summer and put up 6 quarts the right way, a pressure canner, a tested time, and boil them 10 minutes before you eat them. Or find the oldest woman in your family who still cans and stand in the kitchen beside her for one whole day and do exactly what she says. Or just go home and ask her before you can't how she knows a jar has sealed. And tell me in the comments, did your people can? What did your grandmother put up? And what county was she in? Is there still a pressure canner rattling in a kitchen where you're from? Still a cellar wall of jars? Or is it down to the last 1 or 2 who remember how? One thing before I go, and I'll only say it the once. Everything I know, everything on this channel, I'm putting in a book, sourced the way we do it here. Every claim with where it comes from, so it's written down and checkable before the last of us takes it into the ground. If you want it, it's at EzraCade.com. That's the only time you'll hear me say it. They knew. Now it's written down.